Hi, and welcome to week 4 in review. Thank you for your very thoughtful and insightful week 4 participation tasks for ECE 410. So I want to start with your responses to the first two questions, which were which disability category do you feel most prepared and least prepared to work with? Many people referred back to disability classifications. And the reason I particularly asked about disability category and not classifications is because disability classification, and it's prescribed under federal law, and there are thirteen categories, 13 classifications, can be very political. And you will find in many cases that children are given a classification, and you're like, what? First of all, the classifications don't apply to early intervention. So, no child in early intervention receives a classification. The 13 classifications don't apply in early intervention. Second of all, in CPSE, every child in CPSE has the classification of a preschool child with a disability. So there are no classifications for 3 to 5 year olds either. The classifications don't come into play until a child is um, basically in a CSE, which starts when a child is 5. And so then we see the classifications. And there are some families who will advocate for specific classifications. There are some school districts who will advocate for particular classifications. There will be times that people advocate for change in classifications for particular reasons. Families do not want their children labeled as having an emotional behavioral disorder, right? It's not a label people want to carry with them in many cases. And it often looks more polite to have a learning disability, or that's more acceptable to many people. So you will sometimes come across a child in first grade, second grade, third grade, because we work in early childhood. And you see their classification and you're like, what? This doesn't necessarily match the child that I'm seeing. So I have very personal experience. The district advocated for a diagnosis, classification of other health impaired for a child that really did not qualify for that diagnosis. However, districts also need to be thinking about the race of the child, the ethnicity of the child, how many of their children they're diagnosing with certain classifications, because those things are looked at by the state, as you can see in the data. So just so you know, most people felt most prepared to, so it's interesting to work with physical, developmental, and emotional behavioral disorders. Um, Most people felt least prepared to also work with emotional behavioral disorders, physical disorders, and many people felt unprepared to work with sensory disorders, which are people who are blind, deaf, and deaf-blind. So, just so you know, and many of you know already, that I am a certified teacher of the deaf in New York and in other states. And I have worked at schools for the deaf, and my last job before starting at BMCC was at a school for the deaf in the Bronx. Um, that New York State has schools that have been established for children who are blind, children who are deaf, and children who are deaf blind. So rarely will you see or will you have a child who has a sensory disability included in your class. That family has to really advocate for that child to be included. These specialized schools were established to support the needs of the of children with sensory disabilities. And for the younger children, they are more likely to be in the specialized schools because the supports that they need are there. And as they get older, they may be included, but it's not going to happen early on. Maybe for a child who has a cochlear implant, um, again, it depends. But just clarifying that. Then why did I have you look at the graphs? What was the purpose of that? So, first of all, I wanted you to dive into the numbers. Some people gave me like a 30,000 foot view and said, oh, this is the chart, and the chart says there's disparities, or the chart says that developmental disabilities and language disorders are the most frequent classifications for children with disabilities. Well, how frequent? How many? Right? Because I've just told you this is politics. A part of it's a big part of it's politics. So, and then children with other health impairments are like 1%. So, what does this look like, right? And how does it change over time? Like, I want to know the numbers. I want to know, like, get deep into it, dive into the data. I want you to look at what you're seeing, and play around. It's like, jumping into the ball pit or the the soft blocks at the trampoline park. Jump in and immerse yourself in it and play around in it, right? Um, see what you can piece together about this. Um, with a lot of the data for disparities, systemic racism is baked in to our society, and to special education and early childhood special education. Many people pointed out that in early intervention, Black, brown, children of color were least likely to receive early intervention services. That is racism. Plain and simple. That is racism. That is lack of access. That is children not having, children who go to a clinic who see a different doctor every time. Um, and that doctor might not have it might be an intern, it might be a resident, it might not be an attending physician. And so that child is not receiving the highest quality of medical care. And so there, no one is tracking and monitoring. People are just relying on notes that might be scant and might not be detailed, right? That child might be in a child care program. They might not be in a child care program. If they're in a child care program, have the staff in that child care program been trained to identify children with disabilities. Our research shows that the programs that receive vouchers for um, uh, many families that receive vouchers, that receive that provide services for children with um, from low income families um, don't receive high levels of professional development beyond the minimums required by licensing agencies. So that's an issue, right? We're not talking about what does autism look like in a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old because those PDs aren't happening. Those professional development opportunities aren't happening. So that's confounding things, right? With the who's catching this and who's making the referrals. It's not happening. And so the access to early intervention is limited. And then we also see that children who are Black and brown are more likely to be placed in more restrictive environments. They are more likely to have classifications such as emotional behavior disorders, which also, by the way, how do you diagnose emotional behavior disorder? It has a lot to do with the judgment of the clinician. And as some people saw in their, so it's judgment based. It depends on what people think. It's not based on the results of a test. Um, and as some people noted in some of your charts, who are the people making the judgments? Who are the professionals? White people, white women are most likely the professionals. Some people picked charts that looked at the people who are providing um, early childhood special ed or working in early childhood special ed. And so you have cultural differences, you have uh, differences in behavioral expectations between races. And so there is so much baked racism in special education. And how do we address that? We first have to identify it. We first have to recognize it. And then we have to work to dismantle and unpack it. So part of this experience was enabling us to look at it, identify it, recognize it's there. And then part of what we're going to do is think about how we can unpack it, how we can recognize it and take it apart. So thank you for your insights. Thank you for your honesty, your candor. If anyone would like to talk more deeply with me about the content of this week's module, I'm happy to have those conversations. I have office hours Monday, 4:30 to 6:30 on Zoom, Monday, 8:45 to 9:45 p.m. on Zoom, and Wednesday, 9:30 to 10:30 in 199 Chambers Street, 6th floor, S616. So again, happy to have those conversations. I hope you have a great rest of the day. I look forward to your week 5 participation tasks and reviewing those. Be well, and I will see your feedback soon. Thank you.